Hello and welcome. Chillo here with another V-Rising video, and today I'll be going over a post I made over on the V-Rising subreddit a couple days ago. I asked you guys, how late is too late? Lately, I've been reading a lot of posts about important unlocks happening too late in the game. The general consensus seems to be that by the time you unlock some of these crafting stations, your progression is basically over, so you have no use for them. If you could change the progression unlock order, what would you change it to? When would you unlock major crafting stations like the Fusion Forge and the Blood Mixer? What about the Redistribution Engine? What bosses would you reassign these things to? So I got like way more responses to this post than I thought I would, so I'm gonna do my best to kind of go through some of the ones that kind of like stick out to me and then maybe discuss some of my thoughts and responses to them. Real Student 6789 said, I would definitely move iron slashers earlier. By the time you are high enough to unlock the regular ones, you're a couple of weapon tiers beyond them. Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a fair response here. Honestly, like it doesn't make any sense. It's like having, like why are you even getting like the drops or even finding in chests the higher tiers of the same item without having the iron figured out? Like that doesn't make any sense to me either. So yeah, I completely agree here. Fucking Espoogs said, which by the way, I love that name, it's great. I think the Fusion Forge and Blood Homogenizer are at fine places now. These are very min-max oriented stations that should only really be available at endgame in my opinion. The Redistribution Engine should come somewhere in Act 2 so we can get more use out of it throughout the game, but I still get a lot of use out of it at endgame when I'm farming perfect weapon and jewel stats. Every weapon type should become available at Iron with Quincy. Only Merciless/Upgrades types should be unlocked behind V-Bloods. Spell points should be typeless and only differentiate between Veil, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Ultimate, to allow for more determinism when trying to make builds in the early/mid game. So you get a Veil point, you can choose any Veil spell. You get a Tier 1 point, you can choose any Tier 1 spell, etc. I think this is a really good suggestion. I really like this because it kind of says the quiet part out loud, I think. As far as like the Fusion Forge and Blood Homogenizer, I can definitely see that argument that, hey, you know, these are min-max stations, you should probably have them later into the game. And because they're min-max oriented, maybe that's more of like a PvP focused kind of thing, and PvP kind of is the end game for a lot of people. I can see where they're coming from here with that assessment. As far as the Redistribution Engine, I've seen some people say that maybe you should have the Redistribution Engine come out or be unlocked when you kill Ziva, which I think is not a terrible suggestion. It does feel like you are getting the Redistribution Engine a little bit late into the game, and it feels almost like you've gone through all this trouble of trying to build up your base and craft all these materials and do a lot of the grinding, especially around the iron level when you start using iron and stuff like that, so that by the time you get to Ziva, you have so many different materials you're trying to process that having the Redistribution Engine would be super helpful by then. So maybe it would be more impactful for it to be a little bit sooner. Currently it's unlocked under Henry Blackbrew, so that's a little bit later into the game. So yeah, I kind of feel like that's a fair suggestion. When it comes to things like spell points and having like a specific type of spell point unlocked and then being able to choose freely what you want, I think that's a good idea. I don't necessarily like the restriction of having to choose between certain types of Veil spells that I really don't want to use. I think that if you have an unlock for a Veil spell, not being able to use any of them that you actually want for so long into the game, it kind of sucks, not gonna lie. It just kind of feels bad. I feel like it doesn't really feel good when you're wanting to use a different kind of dash for like what feels like most of the early game and most of the mid game before you finally unlock like another one. Like it just kind of sucks. So yeah, I agree. I think more flexibility with being able to choose what spells you want earlier, and maybe having like a tier 1 or tier 2 kind of spell categorization might be a little bit more fair. So I think that I think this is a good suggestion, maybe something to consider. Ragnarok Sunset replied to this person and said, Fusion Forge in particular reads to me like a grand skip mechanic more than anything else, which is fantastic. Playing blind, I definitely had to grind a bit before I could beat Dantos. Got Solaris first, actually. So it felt like a real reward to get. Wow, that's crazy. I can't imagine clearing Solaris before Dantos. That's kind of insane. God of Urging replied to them and said, yeah, the Redistribution Engine would be great if it came early enough to be relevant in the constant refining we do in the mid-game. And you know what? That's basically what I was saying earlier. I completely agree with that. Redistribution Engine is not a min-max kind of oriented station or thing you can put in your base. So it feels kind of not as useful as it potentially could be, or as impactful as it potentially could be, had we gotten that item a little bit earlier into the game. Scott Liberation replied to them and said, I'm just finished playing through Act 2 for the first time, and I don't think I can agree about unlocking all the new weapons at once. It would be a bit much and a huge iron sink when I'm already hungry for iron. It'd be a bummer to try and pick just one or two to try out while saving the rest of my iron for building cages and such. With them being drip fed one at a time by V-Bloods, it gives me a chance to build up iron so it doesn't feel like a huge extravagance or burdensome to craft them as soon as I unlock them, and gives me a chance to try them out one at a time. Although I still haven't tried all of them because I've gotten several merciless iron weapon recipes and don't want to get a bad first impression from one feeling underpowered because I only have the basic iron tier. Ditto with the spell point thing, I can see why both these changes would be great for replaying, but for a first timer who isn't familiar with all the spells and weapons, too many choices at once can lead to choice paralysis, which isn't fun. I think that's a fair argument, especially with the choice paralysis thing. Like, a lot of times, as someone who plays the game pretty often, it's hard to sometimes put yourself in the shoes of like someone who is new to the game or unfamiliar with the game, and I think that's something that a lot of players might forget sometimes. So the fact that this person kind of brought that up, I think, is kind of an important point, especially because at some point we were all brand new to the game. It's something we all have in common. It's something that eventually we just kind of move on from if we decide to keep playing and all that good stuff. And if you're like me, several thousands of hours into the game later, you tend to forget about this kind of stuff. So I think that's a really fair point. DragonSeth07 says, crafting stations and whatnot are totally fine to have late. I want weapon types unlocked sooner. I want the full suite of weapon options unlocked way earlier because they are fun and using different weapon types is a blast. I can also see their argument as well. I feel like this person kind of has like the opposite opinion of the previous person. So it's kind of funny to see like this kind of crossroads where it's like an impossible situation. Like, do you cater to the people who want to have all the weapons at once or want to have maximum choices in the very beginning? Or do you want to cater to the people who are brand new and maybe don't want to be overwhelmed, perhaps? I don't know. But I think it's interesting to see that shift or that split in opinion, especially when it comes to things like weapon unlocks and stuff like that. And I'm sure there's going to be more posts further in that kind of go into that a little bit more, or even kind of discuss that at greater length in general. It's fucking hot outside, which, by the way, that's a great name and totally true in this hot summer. Says, I just want slashers back where they belong, with Bane as their V-Blood who unlocks them. Blue_moon_lake replied, keeping Bane with daggers is not an issue. I'd rather they add a V-Blood with slashers in Dunley. Could be at the sacrificial site, Southwest Dunley. I think both of these responses are potentially good ideas. It used to be that Bane would unlock the slashers, and now it's unlocked through Jakira, which is like way later into the game than it used to be. So I can kind of understand this. I think that it's not necessarily a terrible idea. The idea of adding like a new V-Blood to Dunley, or even at the sacrificial site, is kind of an interesting idea, because a lot of the times I tend to forget about that sacrificial site because you only kind of walk past it, you see it and you think it's weird, but you don't really have any real reason to be there. So if they did add a boss there, or added something that only appeared at a certain time of day or something like that, like let's say there was a boss that you can only see during the day or only at night or something like that, I think that would be kind of unique, because right now we don't really have a boss like that only shows up at night or only shows up during the day. So I don't know, maybe that's an interesting idea, and I can definitely see why people would want slashers earlier. especially because there were a lot of people who really liked slashers as like their favorite item. I'm not a huge slashers fan. I think it's okay. I like the scythe, axes, and the claws the most right now. I think those 3 weapons are kind of like my favorite go-tos. So I feel like I'm not really like part of the people who really want to see the slashers earlier. I'm kind of indifferent, but I can definitely see why people would say that. Puritanical Panic. Oh my god, I love that name. Hilarious. I think most things are fine. I just want all weapons to be unlocked by Iron Tier. Like, you should be able to have the default Iron Tier weapons, armor, and jewelry, and take on all weapon drops with reasonable gear. I prefer Copper, to be honest, to really let you choose your playstyle, but there are so many weapons that would probably get a bit crowded. Maybe more wacky weapons can unlock later. Like if there was a tech-focused weapon, okay, you get that from Gloomrot. I'm fine with pistols being where they are as a later iron, for instance. Wouldn't mind a vampire rifle, to be honest, but that's not what I'm here for. Iron slashers are the main thing people have issue with, and that's fair. I don't really like them, and they're unlocked so late. I'm already set in my ways. They just feel like worse claws. I could see a utility in them via the invis. They're just boring as a weapon. But regardless, this isn't complaint about slashers time. I agree that they come too late. If a weapon excel in PvP terms, making them unlock later is just a win harder mechanic rather than a balancing choice. They will be employed to noob stomp. Anyway, that's the end of my disjointed thoughts. Well, Puritanical Panic, I kind of agree with what you're saying here. I can definitely see what you mean by it being like a noob stomp kind of weapon, especially with the invisibility. I do think that maybe having more weapons unlock at Copper Tier is not the worst of ideas. The real question I have then is which weapons do we unlock at that tier? And it's kind of a hard choice. There's so many different weapons. I guess it's kind of weird, like in a sense, because you have some people who are just like, yeah, I kind of want to see the slasher sooner, and then about half of those people seem to want to have all the weapons unlock at Iron Tier. I can see why people would say that. At the same time, the idea of having to make all of these weapons at that level when you're already hurting for iron is kind of insane, and I'm not really sure if that's the best way to go about it. So I'm not really sure about this. I'm kind of split on it, to be honest, guys. I'm starting to have second thoughts. I do agree though with the fact that they said that, you know, they're kind of already stuck in their ways by the time they unlock the claws. I can definitely kind of understand that, because for me, you know, once I get a comfortable play style, once I find the spells that I really like to use, I don't really change it up much throughout the progression. And maybe that's just like a personal preference thing. Maybe that's just laziness. I'm not really sure, but I can definitely kind of understand what they're saying here with that. Shamrock34 says, Redistribution Engine should be with Ziva, since that's right when multi-station crafting kicks off and it also fits thematically. Iron Slashers should just be a natural unlock with Iron Tier, and Shakira should... Shakira, that's funny. Should give Sanguine the way Simon does. I understand the desire to rework PvP balance, but with the way it is, the higher tiered and already more powerful players are the only ones with access to slashers, so that rework really only made the imbalance worse in my opinion. Blood mixing and Fusion Forge I'm actually fine with, since they're pretty late game functionality anyways. Treasury flooring is perfect as it is. If it ever gets put to Duke of Peloton, then so help me. I'll riot. Blue_moon_link replied to them saying, can split Redistribution Engine in two. Redistribution Engine unlocked with Ziva, but with only few connections possible. Advanced Redistribution Engine unlocked with Voltatia, with the full connections pool. With the Redistribution Engine, I also agree that it should be unlocked around the time that you take down Ziva. I think by the time you get it, it's so late into the game, like I said earlier. Like, it does feel like you accomplished something once you get it, and you're like, yeah, finally, I can get the stuff going. But, I mean, by the time you get it, it's so late into the game that a lot of the opportunity where it would have been super, super helpful has already passed. So, I'm kind of on the fence on that. By the way, guys, if you haven't seen it already, I did make a Redistribution Engine guide, so make sure to go check that out if you don't know what I'm talking about, or if you've never used it or have questions about that. That's a separate video altogether. Bert_Flaxton says, I think if there were some sort of endgame scenarios to use the gear in, there would not be an issue. After playing the game PvP for the first 2 years, this last playthrough I started a private server and got 7 to 8 of my buddies to play PvE Brutal. For as much fun as I had the first 2 years, if you have a group to play PvE Brutal with, it is amazing. Only issue is that there is a serious lack of content after the level 80-90 stage. Need endless dungeons or something. Maybe even some sort of dungeon extraction system, if that does not sound too cliche. I do agree that there is a serious lack of content past the level 80-90 stage, at least for PvE. And I think that because of that, a lot of these servers that go up tend to go down within like the first 2-3 months of the game's major updates. And I guess it does kind of make sense. I mean, the game doesn't really need to necessarily have a bunch of stuff to do continuously. Like, it's not a live service game. But at the same time, I do think there should be some kind of option for people who want to stick around and just really like playing the game to have something else to do that's not necessarily something like castle building. And that's coming from someone, myself, who really likes to build castles. So I mean, I can definitely see this as being an interesting idea of just having dungeon extractions or something like that. It might kind of change the genre of the game though, so I'm not really sure if that's like the direction that they should be going in, but I do think it's an interesting suggestion. Diligent Stand 8737 says, blood mixing is basically unlocked as you do your final run of bosses. Kind of frustrating. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely agree with this in the sense that, you know, as a PvE player myself, I definitely feel like by the time I got blood mixing, it just felt like, what do I do? Do I continue to work on the bosses, or do I actually build up my collection of 100% blood types? I don't know. Do you really want to disrupt your whole thing to, you know, start min-maxing with the blood mixing? I'm not really sure. And I can definitely see why they're saying that, especially from like a PvE perspective. It definitely feels like you're not really able to utilize it for anything useful by the time you get it. Protection 19478 says, Redistribution Engine way earlier for crafting scrolls/schematics. People complain about the slashers being late, but maybe it's no coincidence that the boss is cheesable from an early level. I can kind of understand what this person is saying with the scrolls and schematics. I think that there's so many opportunities to build up getting your scrolls and build up getting your schematics, especially because you're going to need schematics later for summoning if you decide to use the Stygian circle. I can kind of understand why they would say that. At the same time, if you're new to the game, there's just information you're just not going to know as a new player. So the idea that the boss being cheesable is kind of like a given thing is not really a fair assessment, I think. So for example, you have Meredith versus Craig in the Iron Mines. I think that if you're a new player, you're not necessarily going to know that those two bosses will fight each other if they see each other. I mean, if you're brand new to the game, you're just not going to know that. Yeah, I mean, this is something you can maybe luckily find out if you just so happen to be in an area where there's a Trent or something and she starts fighting the Trent. I mean, that could be great. The boss can potentially be cleared at a lower level, but that it's not a guaranteed thing to happen. And I don't know. I guess to me, it doesn't seem really fair to use that as like the logic behind why slashers are so late into the game. I just don't buy it. I feel like it's just because it's so situational. I mean, how would you know, right? So I'm not really sure about that. I'm kind of on the fence on that one. Yarrow567 says, honestly, I'd like all the specific storage options unlocked earlier. I have no clue why fish, coins, weapons, and armor storage are so far down the line. I agree. You don't unlock those until Sir Magnus, and I think it's kind of insane. I think if you're going to have these specified storage containers, they should probably be unlocked with specific bosses and stuff. So maybe, for example, the fish cooler could be unlocked with Finn, for example. Maybe that would make more sense. I don't know. I don't understand why Sir Magnus has to gatekeep all of those different things. It is really late into the game, or at least it feels like it, to be able to get those kinds of storage containers, especially because by then you already have the treasury, so it just seems kind of odd. So I'm gonna have to agree with them here. Terrible Timmy, shout out to him. He says, I find it to be just fine. Playing a survival game as PvE means there will naturally be an end, and regardless of how you cut it, something will be unlocked just before the end. If you unlocked all progression items where everyone seems to want them, around level 50 or 60, then the second half of the game would just become beat the boss to get the armor to beat the boss to get the armor, and no other meaningful progression item would even be there to unlock since you already unlocked it all. The Lucid Chiba says, it is kind of weird finding merciless slasher plans way before you can use them. And yeah, I kind of agree with that. I can see what Timmy is saying here too. I definitely think that there is some merit to the idea that, you know, you should always have something to work toward other than just beat the boss to get armor, then beat the boss to get armor. I can definitely see that. I do think though that there is a danger of having too many things unlocked at the 50 to 60 mark of your progression, because it almost feels like a little too front heavy on the progression to have all your stuff unlocked immediately or have stuff unlocked by then, because at that point you still have a ways to go before you beat Dracula. So it's kind of like, I would even say it might even be a little overwhelming. So I can kind of see his point here, but I don't know. You guys let me know what you think. Ragnarok Sunset says, Treasury Floor is way too late based on my first blind playthrough. Yes, an optimized run with prior game knowledge will get you a Treasury Floor way more quickly, but games should never be designed around the knowledge gained from already playing them past the pain point in question. I don't know why so many people like downvoted this. I've been saying since the 1.1 drop that I was kind of surprised that you even have to unlock treasury flooring. I thought that maybe that would be something you would have right away. But I also understand maybe wanting to have players feel like they gain something or starting to progress once they reach a certain point. I just don't know if having it behind Nicholas makes much sense to me. So I'm kind of on the fence on this. Like, on one hand, I definitely agree that it kind of does get unlocked a little later than I would like, but at the same time, I understand the argument of, hey, we need something to have players unlock early that feels very impactful so that it kind of gives you that motivation to keep going and progress. So I don't know. It kind of goes back to the whole thing where there seems to be a split between players who play the game over and over again, whether you be a PvP player playing on a fresh wipe, or you're a PvE player who has just played the game several times and just done the progression several times. There seems to be a split between those people and the people who are kind of newer to the game, which is not surprising. I don't know, I guess it's kind of natural for that to happen. I also don't really understand why like this necessarily got a bunch of downvotes. I don't think it's necessarily a terrible take. I can definitely see where this person is coming from, and I think it's a fair assessment, especially if you're like newer to the game. Kill Me Please 4656 says, let's not forget horses being half decent is way too late in. And yeah, a lot of stuff being unlocked near the end is especially doo-doo when there is basically no end game, like you get slashers for like maybe 1/4 of the game, and also getting gear for multiple servants you can give some old shit, but when you finally have them good enough to do anything worth, you don't even need anything. Edit. And some veils are not horribly late, but still annoyingly so. Yeah, you know what? I kind of do agree with that. Having the vampire horse upgrade locked behind basically, I believe a tier 3 heart. I forget exactly. I want to say it's like a tier 3 heart upgrade is when you finally unlock the vampire horse. It kind of does suck. Not gonna lie. At the same time, I feel like that's really when your progression starts to really pick up. So I'm kind of on the fence on that. Like, I think maybe if the horse unlock was locked behind something other than the castle heart, maybe that'd be a little bit better. Let's say you kill Sir Erwin, for example, and he unlocks the vampire horse or something like that. I think that might be a fair compromise. That way you have the option to unlock that sooner, maybe. So maybe that's something to consider. But yeah, I agree with this. I think that's a fair assessment. And also not having the veils or having some veils a lot later into the game also really sucks. So I completely agree here. I think this is a fair assessment. I do have a video on the horse rework. So if you haven't seen the changes to that, or you're not aware, or maybe even if you're a little bit newer to the game, and want to know more about the vampire horses and stuff like that, make sure to go check that out. I'm going to link that here for you guys to reference later. All right, guys. Well, that was all of the responses that I wanted to go over today. What do you guys think? How late is too late? Like, what is your thoughts on the slashers? Do you think they should be unlocked earlier? Or do you think that they're unlocked around a correct time that you're okay with? What about the Redistribution Engine? What about the Blood Mixer, the Fusion Forge, and all those other things? Tell me what you guys think, and let me know in the comments below. For those of you who don't know, my name is SholoQ. I stream 3 times a week on Twitch, Kick, and YouTube, and you can find me on various social media. I have a ton of V-Rising content on the channel, so if you haven't checked that out yet, make sure to do so. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful day, and as always, Sholo out.